of IOT members joining us from all parts of South Africa, and greetings to my panelists. My name is Atuchweko, and I'm the founder of an actuarial. The founder of a technology startup company, which is assisting learners to improve their mathematics, so that they're able to enter in STEM. My former profession is I was an actuarial specialist. I'm currently live from the UK and I will be your host this evening. The topic for today is gender equality in coding. As we all know, the computing occupations are the fastest growing, best paying, and now one of the largest sectors of all new wages in US companies. Even other professions are using computing skills, yet women comprise only 26% of the technology workforce and under 20% of computer science students in the education pipeline. When it comes to technology investors, women are even less represented. This trend is common amongst most developed countries, and in developing countries, the numbers are even more grim. Access to electricity, connectivity, is still presenting large barriers to entry. So, to help me unpack this topic of gender equality in coding, allow me to introduce my panelists who are incredible powerhouses. So, we have Ms. Audrey Mutupi. Audrey is the CEO of Systemic Logic Group, a global research, innovation, and digital technology firm with a proven track record for delivering practical solutions across various clients and industries. Prior to this, she was the head of inclusive banking at Standard Bank Group, where the division she led was awarded the 2013 BAI Finance Global Banking um, Innovation Award. Audrey has experience in banking, insurance, group strategy, human resources marketing. She is a fellow of the African Leadership Initiative as part of the Aspen Leadership Network. Audrey holds a BA honors from Trent University in Canada, and her other board positions include being on the board of Pick and Pay, Life Healthcare, and Adden Capital. The next panelist that we have today is Advocate Tambo Gumede. Tando is a South African lawyer, feminist, educator, and speaker. She's the founder of the Mteto search engine, which is an award-winning edtech application that uses artificial intelligence to prevent and adequately respond to incidents of school-related gender-based violence, as well as minimizing the consequences thereof. She also does transformational consulting and educations on issues of equity and intersectionality, as well as law. To kickstart the conversation, there's a book called Gender and Computers: Understanding the Digital Divides. Understanding the Digital Divide. It states that the lack of participation of females in computing is currently excluding them from the new economy. So, starting with Audrey, in your own words, why do you think the gender equality in coding is important? And what has been your experience as someone who is involved in the tech sector?
So I hope all the different listeners are amazing as you are in the world of data as well. I mean, when you ask the question around coding, and today the conversation around coding, one of the things I always say is that coding, when you're coding, it's really the language that you're using. So it's an introduction of a new language, and the inequality comes sometimes even in the use of the language. So when people talk about AI or they talk about the algorithms and computer, I try always to, in my own words, try and simplify it and remind everyone that it's not impossible. So the gender divide, we have to make sure that it starts with our own awareness and our own understanding of what we're talking about. And more important, our own understanding of the fact that we can. Because it's not good enough that 12% of leaders or researchers in machine learning and AI space are women. It's not good enough that only about 15% of AI experts or developers in Facebook are only 15% of whom are women, or 10% at Google. And Charmaine can even give us a number that's ridiculous around Cisco. So the starting point for me is that we need to create the awareness, which is what you're doing. So the first line to remember that it is not impossible and it's not good enough. So we need to stand up and take our spaces. So what are we taking our spaces for? We're taking our spaces for in this new world of artificial intelligence. So we need to demystify what we talk about. I love the UNESCO definition of AI, where they say, simply put, artificial intelligence involves using computers to classify, analyze, and draw predictions from data sets using a set of rules called algorithms. The fact that we're talking about today is around the coding part, which is really defining those sets of rules to create those algorithms. And AI algorithms are then trained using large data sets. I mean, actually, in actuarial science, so you're talking about huge structured and unstructured data. So they can identify patterns. And this is the trick. Once we simplify it as women, that identification of patterns that allows for predictions to be made, and then recommendations and actions that come out of that, is really where the shift happens for me. Because once we start playing our role in making sure that we are at the center of that information to enable the decisions that are taken around whether it's the health issues, agriculture issues, finance issues, eliminate bias. That the inequality comes when excluded in those identification of those patterns or definition of those patterns. Because in the end, we're consumers of products, and it's too late to break that divide if you're not part of it.
Yeah. No, I couldn't have put it better myself. Very insightful insights. Exactly. It starts with the awareness and the access to information. Advocate Tando, please, if you could just share your insights as well.
So I think I like to start everything at the beginning. So the question for me is, why is this conversation even a necessary one to have? And I think that the conversation that we should be starting off with is, what is the status quo that we find ourselves in surrounding the issue of technology in our society? So, and what I mean by saying that is that, so what I mean in saying this, and audio, and to everyone else who's listening, is that we have a set of structural oppressions in our society that make it difficult for people who are not white, people who are not men, people who are not able-bodied, people who are not of a particular gender or a particular socioeconomic class, to generally just not be able to access education and other resources. And so the thing that's interesting to me about technology, and why technology became a space that I entered into, is because the resources for learning and the resources for building something on your own were more accessible than the other resources for education and for entering into other markets and into other spaces that were structurally created to exclude someone who looks like you, right?
Yeah.
And so the importance around technology is not just so much in making sure that there's a certain number that we make up in the space, but it's also about what technology represents for people who have been structurally excluded from society in the formal market. It means that technology has created a pathway for people who ordinarily wouldn't be able to enter into the formal market. And I'm saying a formal marketplace, I'm using, quotation marks, because quite frankly, the languaging around that is to be oppressive to certain people, in particular Black women. So let's look at someone like me, for instance, someone who doesn't come from an affluent or wealthy family, someone who's queer, someone who's a woman, and someone who's black. Other spaces and other industries are typically difficult for me to access. I'm a lawyer, but in my industry, black women make up 4% of advocates in South Africa. And we're not briefed. So you ordinarily would find yourself in a situation where most women advocates are married, or they have to find other ways to generate some kind of source of. But for me, all I need is access to the internet. All I need is a device. And these things don't necessarily have to be mine. And I can learn how to code online for free. And I can build systems, or I can try and ideate or to create around my ideas moving forward. So for me, the insight that I have is that in a world that structurally has oppressed people that look like me, for example, people with disabilities, people who are queer, people who are women, who are black, people who are indigent or poor.
Yeah.
The technology space has provided an opportunity for us to enter into the world, and not only just enter into the world, but to dominate, depending on how relevant your ideas are. But on top of that, we also have an opportunity, and this is what excites me about the work that I do, is that once we enter into the space, we have an opportunity to use this technology and this knowledge to dismantle the very systemic structural oppressions that kept us out of society and be heard. And so for me, for instance, when I started working on Mteto search engine, I always had in mind the most vulnerable people who look like me, and how technology could to empower those people. So here I am as a person who is systemically oppressed, and now I have an opportunity to build for other people who are systemically oppressed.
Yeah. Definitely. I mean, like when it comes to some of the issues that you've raised, it's quite incredible. Just having access to devices and connectivity, you've now unlocked a whole world of opportunity. And now there's no bureaucracy, right? And there's no system to be like, hey, you don't belong here, because the whole world is essentially the marketplace. So as we will, like, some of the points that you're mentioning around gender equality and the need for gender diversity in teams. So there's been a lot of research that's been published saying that a gender diverse team is more likely to create products that meets the requirements, that meets a variety of people's requirements. And when women are, I think this is a point that Audrey mentioned earlier, is that when women are underrepresented, many technical decisions are made based on a men's experience, opinions, and judgment, resulting in products or solutions that have a male-oriented, slanted bias. And in addition, a review of research on gender diverse teams reveals that gender diverse teams groups are much more productive, more creative, more capable of staying on track more than homogeneous teams. So in your perspective, Audrey, what do you think needs to be done in order to overcome this gender equality gap that, as Advocate Thando is saying, is that it's been imposed on us, we just find ourselves here? So what needs to be done to start solving this problem?
I think actually what you're doing today is a start of that. So I mentioned awareness. You mentioned earlier you've got about 300 members. That's 300 more young women who are actually asking themselves the questions what they can do differently. The second part is the issue around, or the construct of gender inequality, is something sadly we've been fighting for a very long time in many sectors. And for some of us who've been around long enough, we're hoping that by the time you processes, it doesn't exist anymore. Which means you're probably the generation that shouldn't be sitting and asking questions of what we need to do. You should be the ones that actually walk into boardrooms and take what you need. So my challenge to you is actually, because to break the inequality starts from every aspect, so every role that each of you is playing right now, you can make that difference. I used the word earlier, demand to be heard and be part of it. It means that you can start with, as Advocate rightfully said, use the resources around you. When you're building and learning how to code, and it's true, there's so many online programs, you can actually do that yourself during lockdown, or even a course of a different course. So I got so excited about the AI issues. I signed up with MIT and did my AI and machine learning course, which excited me. There were about 65 of us, only 2 of us were women in that cohort. So that says something. So go online and learn how to code. So first of all, don't wait to be given permission to do that, would be my generation. Second of all, be curious enough around and look at the technology that's coming around and question it. So you're using all the platforms. You're the digital natives. You're driving a process where you're constantly, everything you do has technology in it. Why don't you get as irritated as I do when I hear Siri and it's just a female voice, and I'm wondering, yes, they've improved and found male voices, but why is it that the products that I use that are supposedly search assistants or administrative assistants, why should they have a female voice in it? Why isn't it a male voice? Why do we still have to apply the stereotypes? Equality starts with even the basic language that you apply in coding. So we're here to talk about coding. Any of you learned how to code who are out there know that you infuse your bias. So part of that inequality also comes in the language, what decisions you make, or the instructions you provide are informed sometimes of experience. So the diversity of thought, of diversity of gender, diversity of even ability and experience is important. Start to eliminate that gap. So when I talk about you going into demand, make sure you're asking the right questions in every meeting. Make sure where the decisions are being made, or where technology is emerging, where decisions are made, even where for good. So EdTech, for example, if you're building an education platform, ask the right questions. Are we writing code that creates a bias for a child in a setting who has had to walk every day to school, doesn't have a luxury of time or awareness or ability to have access to technology to quickly Google and do their research differently? So that educational platform that you're building, factor that in. From a gender point of view, have you actually put in place sensitivities around how women perhaps perceive a particular situation or the other? So I think, Ati, for me, the divide will only start not asking, but going to demand to be heard when the decisions are taking place in the boardroom, when the developers are doing, when we accelerate our numbers, making sure that it's not just between 20 and 20% of us that find ourselves in these roles, that we actually get to that 50%. So we need to set real targets in the environments that we're in. We need to question everything that we see, the technology that we get. If there's a gender bias, why are you supporting a product online that has gender bias? I mean, anything from the dating apps that are out there. I think there's only one dating app that is that I found in the UK, well, actually in the US, that is gender specific, designed by women. You're smiling, but it's everything you consume in your generation has technology and an element of AI, which means somebody sat down, wrote the algorithm, which meant they were coding, and in that process created a bias that excluded you.
Yeah. Oh wow. I mean, I'm glad this is actually getting recorded because it's so insightful. And rightly with what you're saying with you speaking about Bumble. The CEO is Whitney Wolfhard. She was actually on our Forbes under 30 summit a couple of weeks ago. And I think she just shows exactly the power of having women just create products. It's very, very inclusive. So I don't know if we still have Advocate Tando. Okay, yes. So, from your perspective, what would you say are the steps that we could do in order to overcome this gender gap?
Okay. So, look, I think the first thing, especially in far as South Africa is concerned, is that we need to abolish things like corruption. Corruption is something that we need to be very vocal about, because the resources for us to adequately, for instance, penetrate the rural areas and make rural areas into tech hubs is there, but the money is being eaten. So I know that I'm kind of taking this conversation maybe a bit out of the bounds of where you had anticipated it to go, but I mean, this is the reality. And Ati and Oji, this year I went to go and interview for the National Youth Development Agency and to become part of the board. And one of the things that I really wanted to see was to see spaces that were previously disadvantaged, previously under-resourced, like the rural areas, like our townships, starting to become relevant for the fourth and fifth industrial revolution. And all that requires is political will and an end to corruption. So I just want to be honest about the things that are really taking away and depriving us or diminishing our opportunity to really flourish in this regard. The next thing that's really important is partnership. Folks, there are organizations like Google and Microsoft and Avant and the Orange Foundation that go to different schools, under-resourced schools, and ensure that those people, especially your girl children, etc., have got access not only to these digital devices and technologies, but also can learn via these different digital devices and technologies. I was quite shocked to learn that in Zambia, for instance, I have a friend who's an activist, and I was quite shocked to learn that people with disabilities are just discouraged from learning math, science. So those are the types of things. Those are the types of inequitable, oppressive, indignifying things that we need to make sure that we're a part of. We must be part of those conversations. Must be a part of legislative development and policy development and frameworks that seek to indirectly, or in some instances very directly, oppress very specific of people. The next thing is that we have to make sure that where we put women in power, we put women in power who are intersectional feminists, unapologetically. We cannot do this thing whereby we are simply satisfied by someone being a woman, taking a leadership position and making decisions, which may or may not end up being racist decisions, being ableist decisions, being homophobic decisions, or being decisions that disempower women altogether. It's not enough. When we give women power to represent us in spaces, we must make sure that that woman carries with her the appropriate ideology that will ensure that all of these people who are being structurally oppressed, who are not being able to enter into the different spaces, or who are being oppressed by the technologies that are being developed, are there to dismantle that. The final thing that I think, and these are just low-hanging, we can go on and on about this. But the final thing that we need to do is to call out these mega tech companies like your Facebook, who, in the way in which they manage their systems and the decisions that they make, oppress women or oppress other vulnerable groups. I'll give you an example. You know that I'm an activist. I'm a human rights activist. I activist across the spectrum of human rights, be it disability, be it race, be it queer rights, women's rights. Now, I have a page on Facebook, right? And it has happened that on my page, when I put up a post where I have sought to defend human rights, that the decision makers behind that decided that this post was inappropriate, even though it wasn't inappropriate. It didn't use any vulgar, it didn't insult anyone. It was simply a post trying to advance oppressed people's rights. And we have to call those people out, and we can call them out by boycotting their services. We can call them out by just plain old simple calling them out, like what I'm doing right now, you know. And more than calling them out, we have to take the active step in ensuring that the people who are behind those systems making a decision are people who are going to consider the spectrum of human existence and understand that human existence is not just white, male, and heterosexual and able-bodied and belonging to a social elitist socioeconomic class. The last bonus point that I want to make, the fifth point that I want to make, is with regards to education in school. So here's the thing, folks. We've been duping our kids in our schools. Now, I don't know about the other educational context around the world. But we have the wrong people making decisions about what our children ought to be learning in school. We're not teaching our children to think innovatively about solving the most critical socio-economic and political problems. Yes, I mean, it's great to be teaching coding, but we have to be teaching our children about, first of all, the problems that our societies face and how these technologies and the development thereof can be used to address these problems. So that by the time these children come out of the basic education machinery, not only are they building these technologies, but they become the people who are making the decision behind these things, and also are integrating them inside of the organizations that they occupy, even though it might not strictly be the tech industry. But every single place of business, as Audrey had mentioned before, every space nowadays uses technology in one way or another. And so it is not and it's not used to embed in our education, regardless of whether a student has chosen to specialize in coding or programming, but to embed in our educational curriculums an understanding of the socioeconomic political issues of our time, and how technologies have been created currently to be biased and to be oppressive, and how technological or innovative thinking and the entrepreneurial mindset can be used to dismantle the systemic oppressions and intersectional oppressions that we find ourselves faced against the day.
Yeah, no, agree with you 100%, especially the part about education as well, because, you know, with so many learners, I think South Africa has close to 14 million learners in primary and high school. So if those learners are not really educated and well equipped for the next, you know, the world that's currently fast evolving, we might actually miss a lot of them out, which is why you know, organizations like Girl Code are so important, and putting robotics at schools, and you know, startups like mine, where we try to get kids, you know, to improve their math so they can get into computer science. Now, I want to ask this question to Audrey, because she's been in the private sector for a while. And you will have seen that, you know, in boardrooms, like you're saying, there's quite very few representation when it comes to women. And I feel in South Africa, we don't really hold the private sector accountable as much as other countries do. Like in the UK as well as the US, you know, people go in front of the Senate, as you were mentioning with Facebook recently in front of Congress. So in just from your experience and having been part of that generation that had to really fight, really fight to get to where you are, what do you think the private sector should be doing in creating more spaces for women, especially in places of where decisions are being made, in boardrooms, in exco, in a variety, as you know, while we are still waiting for the next generation to come? But how can private sector currently in 2021, 2022 open themselves up to be more inclusive?
I think it's a good question. I think South Africa, first of all, we probably have quite a few more women sitting in those boardrooms than in other places. So the starting point, and the advocate started mentioning issues around inclusivity in terms of how you create the technology in education is one point. I think in the private sector, that public-private partnership and strategic partnership is very important. So when you're in that room, first and foremost, you can actually ask the right questions. Ask the questions around, first of all, where we're investing in that technology. Make decisions or demand that the decisions are taken around procurement. Are we procuring from women in tech, for example? Are we sourcing our resources? I had a fantastic time with Nyari and We Think Code. Are we sourcing and getting our youngsters from an organization that's providing free coding education to South Africans and creating job opportunities for the youth? So it's in the questions that we ask around where the resources are going. It's the questions we ask around the governance around data and information. So yes, we've got the Pocket Act that's come through. So hopefully we'll start seeing a little bit more talking about the Senate hearings, maybe in terms of the execution of that. We can hold our companies and the sector more accountable in how they use that data to not just for technology, but how they use the information to expose your privacy, which they should be protecting, as an example. So in those boardrooms, there's always a question to be asked: who, what, where? Who are we engaging? Where are they based? What value are they creating into broaden societal needs? And where are they positioned? Are they based in SA, or are we just bringing on global companies to solve problems that there is a young, bright South African innovator that's building for? So start by asking those questions in the boardroom. You don't need to be a techie to influence the shift and the change in building this equality. And then it's within your right as well in those rooms to say, we will only, if we're going to procure X percent, 25% or 35% is not enough on women. And women farms, or that's technology, we need to push that to 50%. Because to get to a point that is equitable, somebody needs to say it's not enough, or we need to increase that. And then I think there's another component, which is taking those resources outside your specific sector. So there's nothing stopping us in South Africa to say, how do we invest more in Girl Code? How do we invest more in Code? And how do you actually take it away from the large cities, take it to the rural settings that the advocate is talking to? How do we actually go into the education sector and partner with them to ensure that the right education is taking place? Interesting enough, advocate, it's good that we get as many kids as possible coding, because in that process, we're teaching them how to make sure that the data sets that define the products that are built into the future are relevant to them. Because if we wait until it's too late, they're consuming the wrong products because they were not brought into that value chain early enough. So there's a lot we can do. To be a corporate activist means that you have to be completely bold, demands to ensure that drive to equity. You have to ask the right questions constantly, and you have to make sure that the belief around knowing that right now, we sit here speaking, knowing as we know that women are underrepresented, period, in every single sector. The first question should be, how can we be using technology as an organization to accelerate that gap?
Yeah. No, that was exactly, that was, I mean, very, 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 very insightful. I'm just going to read some comments from the chat. We have a comment from Ms. Tremaine, and she's agreeing with the concept of demystifying technology. And I think Zinhle is also saying that bias in tech is a very big problem. You need to think about, what is the face designing these apps and algorithms? Do they like me? If they don't, does this mean making processes behind the coding? Does this mean that the processes behind the coding will affect me as a user of the technology? So please feel free to ask questions or and pop them to our chat as well. And Advocate Tando, and I think this is a question that both of you can answer. So the previous tech revolution has actually brought about a lot of monopolies, right? So from Facebook to Google to Microsoft, and in developing countries, I mean, if you're trying to enter education, Microsoft is already there. If you're trying to do this, so in a way, which can be good, but in another way, it can be a bit exclusive and exclusive to new entrants, can take away competition. It can, so how do we ensure that as we're growing and evolving as a society, we don't create monopolies? I mean, if we're looking a lot of the sectors in South Africa, for example, very few are not run by big monopolies that have just cut everybody, either out or just blocked entry to the market completely. So as we are hopefully creating an infrastructure and an environment where young people from everywhere are able to code, they're able to get into tech, how do we ensure that we always keep that openness? We keep openness, and then we don't so essentially we keep the space open for new entrants and not just take monopolies only. So Advocate Tando, if you could just start with that.
Okay, so I can really answer that question because I'm kind of in the same situation. So I'm building a search engine, not building a repository, building a search engine. And more often than not, I often find that people try to minimize what I'm trying to do to something less than a search engine, because I think it's quite intimidating for a young Black woman from Africa to say that she's building a search engine, right? So the way that I approached this was to create a niche. So now I'm in a very niche space. So yes, I'm building a search engine, but I'm building a search engine in a very niche space. Of course, at some point it is going to grow, but my advice to people is that in order for you to challenge these big companies, these big corporations, is to focus on a niche market and perfect that. And then you can grow from that to become someone who's a real contender in the market. I won't necessarily reveal to you where I'm headed in the future, but I think my profession, is a big hint. I'm actually trying to go. But the only reason why I think I've been able to push through so far is because I picked a niche market and I focused on that market. And not only that, I'm an expert in that market and in that space. It becomes a lot less deniable to provide me with the opportunity to push me forward. So I'm speaking now as a young entrepreneur trying to put myself in the space and competing with big organizations. The other thing, and this is so critical, my goodness, I don't know how much I can emphasize this more. Collaboration. The reason why I pivoted Mteto search engine, actually Mteto used to be a game, by the way. It used to be a game that is both gaming and gamification to try and teach about social justice. And then obviously I got to know a lot about intervention, what to do, what not to do. And so this thing that was actually the secondary part of my innovation became the primary part of my innovation. But what I realized is that this is actually so much better than building a game, because now I can invite everyone into the space. I want to collaborate with everyone, every single organization out there that is aiming to dismantle gender-based violence, or who is trying to advance human rights, who is trying to advance intersectionality and equity, is more than welcome onto my space. And that's how I think we need to move forward. And I think other people, as soon as we hear that Tando is doing 150, people just shut down. and they don't want to talk to you anymore, or they become really like creepy and sneaky, and it's so unnecessary. And I think my approach has always been, oh, you're teaching kids about law and human rights. Please come. I want you on my platform. I'm not interested in competing with other people. To be quite frank, if you are a digital content creator and you are advancing human rights, or you've created something that is an intervention for school-related gender-based violence, I want you to on this engine. I want to index as many people as possible who are doing work to advance human rights, and my responsibility is to tailor that for a particular market for you. Don't have to.
Yeah.
So those are the two things. Those are two things that I can say as someone who's emerging and trying and moving, and things that I've learned over the 4 years that I started this journey is pick a niche market, be an expert at that, and number two, find ways to collaborate. It's not as dog eat dog as you think. You might actually find that the collaboration are the things that really propel the ideologies that you're trying to push, the agenda that you're trying to push. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for those insights, Advocate Thunder. Please, Audrey.
So it's good to hear, and it's a good question. So if we look at, I'll take the Facebook or even Google. They started somewhere, like the Advocate, in a garage. It was small. So my answer to that typically is, actually, I think it's not either or, it's both and. So we do need some of the big companies. In my view, you talk about creating a collaborative space, and it's right. I talk about the world of building and open platforms and an e-commerce space where there's an opportunity for everyone, which is what the Advocate is talking about. And I think the reality is, depending on what we're solving for, an opportunity. So right now, as we sit here, the technology that is technology for good across, for example, nations, I still believe that the future unicorns haven't emerged fully, because they'll be solving for a different problem that's not sitting and hasn't been sitting in Silicon Valley. The reality of the matter is, we can't stop innovating, but at the same time, we can't stop being inspired by those that are big. Once they're big, like Facebook as an example, even the Twitters, etc., then we need to hold them accountable around the ethics and the governance structures that come back to the ideas of humanity, of just respect. We've been talking here about coding and gender inequality. So let's not allow them to create a space where women are made to feel vulnerable and unsafe. Let's hold them accountable to that. But at the same time, let's hold them accountable by making sure that they create opportunities for women such as Advocate Gumede to put their products in a space where they can get exposure to the markets that they already have. So I'd like us to look at it as not as either or, but both end. And one is saying, how do we actually accelerate that growth elsewhere to change lives? Because with technology, what we're talking about today is that the future is different, because technology will accelerate and change many lives. So it's not a case of where it will happen in a particular geography or market and take another 5 to 10 years to get to us. While we're watching the shifts that are taking place, why don't we just ensure that collectively, the private sector, the public sector, the activists, the change agents, by the way, anyone listening, we're talking about coding. If you learn how to code, you can change the world, because you can code for good, or you can code to make money. Nothing's going to stop you to do that. And what I'm saying is that let's combine the two. Because people like myself, I'm constantly pushing to build ecosystems. Because in an ecosystem, I want to make sure the best of comes on board. That's in agri-tech, meditech, or fintech. You need to save lives with meditech. You need to build for food security in agri-tech. You need to provide access to finance. And if you combine those three, you're creating a space using technology that hopefully touches more just the privilege. So for me, it's like not either both and, but let's hold anyone who's made it big accountable to make sure that the ethics and the governance, the processes that they continue to embed and build. The question I think Zintla mentioned, if they don't know me, they're going to, and they don't like me, they're going to make technology that makes everybody else not like me. So let's actually hold them accountable and say, you don't know me, So let me help you understand who I am.
Yeah. Okay. No, that was phenomenal. I'm going to just read one comment and then we can just have closing remarks. It's a comment from Mom Trifosa Ramana, and she's saying that the issue in South Africa and the continent is infrastructure. Now with load shedding, when power is off, you can't even communicate. Continue, and then you continue with accelerating the gap for those who cannot afford. So, and I think this, oh, then governance and ethics around AI is key. That was a separate comment. But yeah, so generally, I think that's one of the belief, access to connectivity, and the people who have, you know, the telcos and and other companies being very slow in connecting schools and connecting clinics, and requiring capital. So things like that, I can actually be sort of making the progress a bit much more slower than it actually needs to be, because there's absolutely no reasons why schools in South Africa don't all have free Wi-Fi, and that's like millions, 14 millions of kids, and they have to go there and they have to use their own data. Whereas those in power could actually help, with the situation. So putting profits a little bit behind when it comes to the social good, especially when it comes to education and healthcare, and like you're saying, agriculture and so forth. So yeah, so closing remarks. Audrey, I'll start with you. Anything you want to say regarding this discussion today?
Yeah, I think just to reiterate, I think the issue of connectivity is a big one, and if you're starting from point zero, it's even a bigger challenge than just the inequality that's in place. And then secondly, while we're dealing with the connectivity issues and the challenges that we also have to inspire and make sure that every single girl. So for me, my parting words and closing is there are free tutorials to learn how to code. So I'm coming back to your subject matter for today. Go in and learn a new language. So think of it as learning a new language. You're either going to learn a new language to change and find solutions to extract some of that CSI to go and improve the infrastructure for connectivity, or you're going to learn a new language that builds a new product that saves lives in the future.
Yeah, thank you so much for those insights. Advocate Thando, your last remarks and closing remarks for today.
Thank you so much, for having brought me to the platform, and I think this was a very rich discussion. So I'm going to say this, that look, let's not wait to enter into the spaces where we're going to make change. Let's create our own space. Technology allows us, and it's not enough for us to just want to take up other mega organizations where it will take years and years for you to climb up the power ladder. What we need to focus on now is how do we create collaborative. We have an opportunity as Africans to define what the fourth and fifth and forthcoming industrial revolutions are going to look and feel like, and to define the ethos around. When we create these spaces, when we do this work, we must always remember the ideology of Ubuntu, of restorative justice that centers the most vulnerable of people, intersectionality, and equity. When we build, when we create, when we collaborate, do not forget principles and ideology, or else we will find ourselves building the very same oppressive that have oppressed us for decades, for centuries. So Africa, young Africa, it is time for us to stand up. It is time for us to come together. It is time for us to collaborate, and not for us to merely consumers of what the Western society are creating, and then only react to what is done. We have an opportunity just with our cell phones, just with our laptops, no matter how slow the bandwidth. We have an opportunity to come together and to engage in discourse just like this one, and to begin to build our future, to build feminist intersectional futures that are going to be meaningful for our own narrative, and recreating, reimagining, and claiming the new African narrative, and the narrative for people who across the world seem to be less than or less valuable than other humans.
All right, thank you so much, Advocate Thunder, as well as Audrey, for being part of today's conversation. We have a comment from Deniso, who's Viola Deniso, who's saying that the future is indeed different as the technology will help us accelerate progress with the challenges that we have as women. Thank you, Audrey, and thank you, Tando. Thank you to everyone and our members that joined in, our YLT members that joined today. May you all have a lovely, lovely evening.